Let's talk about social emotional learning on today's episode of In and Around WPS. Don't go anywhere. Hello, I'm Tracy Youngberg, Superintendent of Windham Public Schools, and I'm here today with Miss Tanya Fleeting. Tanya used to be our Project Aware coordinator. And now she's our social emotional learning coordinator since Project Aware is soon to be leaving us. So I'd like to hand things over to Tanya to talk to us a little bit about social emotional learning.
Okay, so one of the questions you had was what has Windham Public Schools done over the past 5 years under Project Aware? And we've done so many things and grown so much. So do you want me to just kind of go through the programming that we've been?
Yeah, I think that's a really good start, but maybe we should make sure the audience understands where this fits into our bigger goals. I'm just thinking that. So every school system has a set of academic goals that they're supposed to try to accomplish. But when you're thinking about academic goals, you really have to focus on sort of child development in general. And social emotional development is a huge piece of who these kids are and what they need to be healthy humans. So with that in mind, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how we've provided teachers with certain tools that they can use to help our students develop in a healthy way.
Definitely. There's definitely been a lot of tools and training for teachers as well as for students. So one of the things that we've done is responsive classroom, and that has been K through 6, and that is a evidence-based approach to teaching discipline and to teaching. And it's really been well received here. And one of our schools has really been a model school for responsive classroom. And we've seen the data that says that it's really working, because they are very committed to it.
And responsive classroom is really an amazing program in that it doesn't stop teachers. It's not an add-on. It becomes part of what they do in their day-to-day operation, how they run their classrooms, how they talk to kids, how the kids talk to one another. So it really is something that they take in and it becomes a part of their classroom culture. Have you actually seen it in action around the district?
I have seen it in action, and I do think, as you stated, that social emotional learning is something that we want to add in, and we want to become it, and it's not something that we just want to do. And the more that we add it in, and it becomes like part of our natural environment, the more the kids are receptive to it. I know the middle school is doing advisory, and they're using that time for social emotional learning. So the more that we use that language and we work with students on the 5 competencies, being self-aware, being socially aware, making just proper decisions. All those things are life skills. So they're not just school skills. They're things that we're going to need throughout our lives. And so it's really important that we make sure our students are having those skills. And I think we're doing a really good job in doing it.
You're absolutely correct. It's like I mentioned when I first started, it's that whole idea about developing good humans, and it is really important for them to have those skills. So we talked a little bit about responsive classroom. What are some of the things that the students have been, aside from that, because we know they're involved in that process, but what are some things that they've experienced since we've had Project Aware and this focus on SEL?
So one of the things that we've done also is the DESA, which is a social emotional assessment, and it's a 1-minute assessment per student. Depending on where they score, they may be asked to take a further assessment, but really that data is great for social workers and for teachers to kind of help guide students to character education courses, maybe our CBITs and our bounce back groups, which I'll talk about later, but also for tiered instruction. We've used that data to look at our tier 1 and how we can inform, instruction that way, or how we can build tier 1 or move students on to other tiers if they need it. So that DESA information has been really useful.
So, and the DESA was really interesting for us when we started to put it in place in the district because we have benchmark systems in place for so many other things. So then to have this assessment that sort of gave us a glimpse into whether or not students fell into a healthy range or a range that required more intervention was really powerful in terms of knowing where they stood and what they needed. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the ways we've equipped schools? I know that we put some library books in place, and we offered a whole lot of resources through Project Aware that kids could get their hands on to sort of, constantly be reminded of the importance of the social emotional learning piece.
Definitely. So with some of the funds that we received through Aware, we build cell libraries in every school, and those books were about race, gender, diversity, equity, inclusion. So we chose those books very carefully just to make sure that our students were aware of, things that may affect them or things that may affect, their fellow classmate. So there's lots of materials that were sent to schools and that are utilized. I've had feedback from social workers and teachers that they've utilized those books and they found them helpful.
That's great. I think anytime a child can find themselves in literature, it's always a win. So that's nice that we've been able to add to our classroom libraries in support of this whole idea of developing their social emotional selves. I don't know if you have any other information about some of the things we've done in the district to encourage this focus on SEL.
Sure. So we've also done CBITS and Bounce Back, and CBITS is cognitive behavior intervention for trauma in schools, and that is a trauma-informed therapy. And we have actually a clinician trained at each of our schools in this therapy. And we've served over 100 students who have gone through the program and successfully completed it and made progress. So that's been really, really great to have.
That's pretty powerful. So when you speak about the trauma-informed care and these opportunities for us to really better understand trauma in our students, some people actually believe that just living in poverty by itself is considered a trauma. So we have a fairly high poverty rate in Windham. So being able to know that we're trying to intervene, where we can to support the kids. And trauma can also be some event that occurred in a child's life or something else that has triggered this response.
Correct. And we saw, like, coming out of COVID, some trauma related to COVID. And as you mentioned, living in poverty and many things that, we may not be aware of that our students are experiencing. So having those groups has been very beneficial, and they will definitely stick around long after aware.
Well, that's what I was thinking, that the fact that we've gone about it and actually trained people in each of our buildings. So even when the grant money disappears, you can't take away the knowledge.
No.
So
We'll still have that available to our students and staff. And some of the other things that we've done QPR, which is question, persuade, refer, and that's a suicide prevention program. And we do this every year with our staff, with our new staff. So as of last year, we had 100% trained, so that changes because staff changes. But we've done really, really well making sure that we're capturing our newer staff to have this training so that if they see anything, they're aware of what to do with those students.
Making sure the front line is always watching for what, places where we need to intervene and stop someone from making a really bad decision.
Correct.
In terms of, you had mentioned briefly a little bit ago about the middle school now having an advisory period that's focused on social emotional learning. I have not had a chance in this first few weeks of school to get in and see that. I don't know if you've seen any of those lessons or can speak to what they might be focused on.
Yes, so I have seen the lessons because I actually write the lessons.
Okay, well, there you go. I guess you know about them then.
So what I've done thus far with the middle school is I looked at their data, and for the month of for September, let me go back. For September, we just did setting norms and how do you set a norm, and reinforcing positive behaviors and making this a safe space, because ultimately we do want students to feel comfortable speaking in class, and we want our teachers to feel comfortable with the material. So that's what we worked on for September. October, by looking at the DESA data, it was showing that our students are struggling with making proper decisions. So it's middle school. That's actually developmentally normal.
Yes.
So that's what we're working on, some lessons that concentrate specifically on making better decisions and how are we more self-aware. When we're having a problem, how do we look at our problem-solving skills instead of maybe being a little explosive or making some poor decisions? How do we make better decisions even when we're upset?
And understanding how those decisions impact the people around us. I know that's definitely, anyone who has kids knows that the middle school years are trying time.
Tough. They're very tough. I mean, it's definitely developmentally appropriate, but it's tough.
It sure is. It sure is. The middle school teachers, we appreciate you very much out there. Okay, so just looking at some of the things we wanted to make sure we mentioned to our audience. I think we covered most of the sort of what have we done so far. How about how you believe Windham is doing in terms of our progress? I know we set a series of goals out with Project Aware, and I know that grant is disappearing, but we did establish some goals for ourselves. So how do you think we did?
I think we did very well with our goals. Actually, we probably met most or exceeded our goals. As you know, it was 2 other districts that were in this cohort. So not in comparison, but as we look at all the districts, we did exceedingly well.
I love to hear that. I'm very competitive. No, but it's a really important topic, so I feel like it's good for us to have done well. One of the things that I wanted to talk about just for a second, and I know you've made this recommendation to me, and that is to really look at the DESA, which is the assessment for determining where students fall in their social emotional development and determining which students are in the normal range and which actually require intervention. But if we could talk about, or you could make that recommendation so the audience can hear about what to do with that data moving forward. Because I know it's one of our areas of growth is really utilizing that data more than we are right now.
Definitely. So I think the DESA data is really rich if we were able to utilize it. I don't think teachers always get their hands on it. I know principals do, and our social emotional learning coordinators do at each school. So I think if we let the teachers see, actually, this is what happens after you give the assessment. This is where your students are, falling, and this is what your school looks like, or even this is what the district looks like. So those are some areas where, there's a little bit of improvement needed, because we could definitely use that data against maybe chronic absenteeism, some things that we see. If we looked at the DESA data, we'd probably see a correlation between those students who are struggling and where they're falling on the DESA.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but I think we're going to dig a little bit more into the DESA and what we can do with that data when we get back. Okay, welcome back. We were talking about the DESA before we left for our commercial break, and some of the things that the schools might be doing in response to our data, or some of the things the schools have done because they know how important, bless you, because they know how important a focus on social emotional learning is. In fact, a lot of the research really is clear that if you focus on just social emotional learning, you will see an increase in your academic performance, even if that isn't your focus, because developing the climate and the environment around the learners is as important as actually focusing on the academic skills. So do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the things you've done in schools, or our schools have done in support of this focus on SEL?
So definitely we've celebrated International Social Emotional Learning Day every year, where schools do activities based upon social emotional learning, and they've done really great things. The high school has done a lot. The students were really involved in choosing books or doing commercials or activities that were related to social emotional learning. Sweeney has done a great job with their activities. So all schools, it was up to them how they decided to celebrate it. Some had parents come in and invited other staff members in, but they did a lot of things that were related directly to social emotional learning.
Absolutely, and I have been able to get around to schools when that International Day is happening. And actually, in general, I think the schools have really made a nice little segue to providing our students with a lot more voice and choice than maybe they've had in the past, which is another sort of focus on SEL without actually saying it out loud. We're giving the kids a voice,
right,
which helps them develop themselves.
Self-advocacy.
Yes, and feeling like they belong in a community and they understand how their interactions impact people around them. I know that during COVID, you were one of the ones instrumental behind the scenes with supporting these SEL days and self-care days for our staff, and even after COVID, but definitely during COVID. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with Aware Funds, we were able to give each school a small budget. This is after COVID, to do something social emotionally related or self-care related for their staff. And we had Zumba, we had meditation, Reiki, aromatherapy. It was really up to the principal and the staff what they wanted, but they really enjoyed it, and it was a great opportunity to say that we know that this is a lot and you're always giving of yourself, so we want to help refill your cup, because you definitely can't pour from an empty cup.
That's a really good point, and that sort of almost like a metaphor, but you can visualize trying to pour from an empty cup, and I think a lot of our educators do that every day.
Right.
They get pushed to the point where they, it's hard for them to give anything else.
And they, experience secondary trauma. So there's a lot of things that our educators are going through. So just those small things, it's not everything, but just those small tokens to say that we think of you and we know that you're going through a lot and we care.
Can you talk a little bit about secondary trauma? Because I have read a little bit about it, and I understand it obviously from a parent and educator perspective, but I don't know if I've ever gone to a professional development where that's been the focus. And I know you're the guru, so maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that.
So I think secondary trauma is really being immersed in other people's trauma all the time and trying to help them kind of get through that, or understanding that, or being empathetic. And it has an effect on you to constantly deal with, a student population that you may know is experiencing trauma just by where they live or their virtual circumstances. So it's a lot. It's very taxing to come in every day and deal with, other people's trauma and be empathetic and understanding to that. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that in our staff.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, I can see in a district like ours where that could be happening on a regular basis, not only to our mental health specialists, but to our classroom teachers, depending on the degree of what they're, experiencing or helping their kids to get through. So I appreciate that you're a bit of an expert or a little bit of a guru in that department and helping us out there. When I think about social emotional learning in general and how this is going to progress after Project Aware, the funds are gone. Like we mentioned earlier in the segment, you can't take away the knowledge. So the specialized training we received is going to stay, and we have to figure out a way to continue doing some of those things. But do you have any other ideas about how we might keep this going when the funds are gone?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that some of the knowledge and training that we have, they're in-house trainers now, so we have those trainers. But just always remembering to keep it a part of the conversation. I think it's important to keep it a part of the conversation and to do advisories or any, I know elementary schools do their homeroom time, to just always dedicate time, and not only separate time, but to find ways to just get it into your regular lessons. We're always teaching lessons. If we're reading a story, it usually has a lesson or some kind of moral. So those are excellent ways and opportunities to just add in that language that we've been learning. Like when we were using the mood meter and we're kind of mapping how we feel, those are excellent opportunities right there already in your lesson to add in social emotional learning.
Thank you very much. You touched on the mood meter, and that's from the Yale training we went through, Ruler. We still do use it in some of our classrooms and around the district, where students and staff can identify how they're feeling. Sort of having that self-awareness helps you to, I guess, get a handle on where you're coming from, understanding where you're going to go that day. And
yeah, definitely. Like one of our lessons for the middle school was based on the mood meter, and then we kind of moved it to using emojis to kind of relate to our population.
Yes.
So we used emojis to kind of map how we're feeling. But I do think it's important to be aware of how you're feeling, because if you can't even name that feeling, then you definitely aren't going to be able to address it. So you first have to know, this is how I'm feeling, and then we can move on to how do we address that if I'm upset, if I'm angry, if I'm disappointed.
Sure. So social emotional learning in general is a really important piece of, as I mentioned in the beginning, just child development, just development in general, and creating healthy humans and having healthy interactions between humans. So I really appreciate all the expertise that you brought to the table. Is there anything else that you'd like us to remember or to think about when it comes to SEL?
I would just like everyone to remember it should be a part of our everyday conversations. I know a lot of times in education, our focus is always academics, but truly we're not going to get to the academics unless we fix what's underneath that. So I would love for us to just make it a part of our everyday conversation of who we are, and not add it on, but add it in.
Sort of touching on what you just said, the whole adding it in, I think it is really important when we all think back to the teachers we've had and the experiences we've had in schools as children ourselves, students ourselves. I honestly and truly don't remember very many lessons. What I remember is the people that made you feel a certain way.
Right.
And so it's really the human interactions you remember. Occasionally I'll remember a certain, we did this experiment in science class, or did this happened, but it really is not about the academics. When you step away and look back, it's about the people and your feelings at that time.
It definitely is about the people, and I can agree. I can remember a fourth grade teacher, Miss Rotundo, who definitely was the feeling I got being in her class, being able to talk to her. She was definitely, we didn't probably use that language back there, but building relationships. So I think it's really important that we build relationships with our students. We have, a population that's really important.
Yeah, and so if we can keep sort of this idea of relationships and taking care of ourselves emotionally in the forefront, just sort of always have it be a part of what we're doing, we're gonna do better for kids. So I think that ends our segment on social emotional learning. I hope you enjoyed listening to myself, Tracy Youngberg, and Miss Tanya Fleeting, our SEL guru in the district. Stick around for the next episode of In and Around WPS.